Hate is probably a strong word here. Yeah, maybe you hated your first playthrough of a game only to come back to it another time and find it a wonderful experience. But what the games on this list demonstrate is that the first impression can be deceiving, and subsequent playthroughs can be just as, if not more, rewarding. Returnal. Roguelike third-person shooter Returnal is relentlessly unforgiving. A game in which time is an agonizing loop for astronaut Celine after she crash lands on the hostile alien world Atrophos. Otherworldly creatures stalk cadaverous biomes, hurling bioluminescent bullet hells between Celine scavenging for artifacts, resources, and ether. It's a challenge and can put players off, but stick around and the accumulated muscle memory makes subsequent playthroughs a breeze. Returnal's emotional narrative weighs heavier on successive runs too, when the unfolding of events have already been discovered. Days Gone. Some love Days Gone, others don't. This zombie-infested trek through Verdant, Oregon is almost the most polarizing game of recent memory. Near 5 years later, the strategic funneling of freaker hordes through carefully laid traps to eliminate their numbers en masse is still a unique highlight. But the monotony of the game's over-reliance on fetch quests is tedious, especially seeing as the story clocks in at 40 or so hours. However, there's joy to be had in subsequent playthroughs. Survival mode ups the challenge, whilst the game's activities, its ambush camps, Nero injectors, and infestation zones can be checked off in a more efficient order, relieving some of the tedium in repeating that lengthy campaign. Death Stranding. There's little to keep inattentive players engaged during Death Stranding's early hours. Walking, delivering packages over colossal distances. Walking, not understanding the lingo in NPC conversations. Walking, struggling through clunky menus, balancing loadouts. Walking. Eventually, the magical lore of this post-apocalyptic land unfurls itself and Death Stranding evolves into an engrossing, rewarding experience. But it takes hours to get to this point. However, once you've got a handle on the game's finicky systems and stately pace, second playthroughs can be anything from meditative and relaxing to uber challenging via self-imposed restrictions of resources, vehicles, or equipment. Nioh. Nioh is a fantastic samurai-tinged Souls-like that's not for the faint of heart. Team Ninja, it seems, wanted to up the soul-destroying difficulty established by From Software, but in doing so, made the game too impenetrable for many. Endlessly collecting loot and grinding for unique builds is where this game shines, but it takes a lot of legwork with an admittedly limited roster of enemies that a first playthrough might seem too much of a chore. Once power and skill arrive, and with a slew of New Game Plus modes, Nioh is worth a subsequent playthrough. Metro Exodus. Somewhat controversial is Metro Exodus, its gameplay eschewing the signature linearity of earlier entries in the series and thus losing its claustrophobic atmosphere. The first hour or so has a middling story too. It's only when the player reaches Volga that the title starts to shine. Still, playing through Metro Exodus for the first time, it doesn't feel like a Metro game. It's only by the game's end that we realize that the dev team have genuinely made attempts to try something different with the series, and the narrative emotional payoff was richer as a result. The Evil Within 2. The Evil Within exhibits tension, demands strategy, inhibits danger, traps, and scares. The Evil Within 2 isn't anywhere near as scary. Its action-driven gameplay eradicates the creeping dread established in the first game, and its monster designs aren't nearly as imaginative. Still, like with Metro Exodus, there's a richer narrative payoff with this sequel. It's just the culture shock and a flip of reversals of everything established in its predecessor that takes some getting used to. With numerous difficulty options to try on subsequent run-throughs, including the next to impossible one-shot death Akumu mode, but with upgrades and collectibles retained, New Game Plus for The Evil Within 2 makes subsequent playthroughs much more enjoyable. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. Replaying Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain with knowledge of its infamous story twists makes for an interesting experience, focusing on all of those subtle and not-so-subtle clues as to Venom Snake's true identity throughout the game is quite captivating. It encourages multiple perceptions of events and characters, none more so than pondering, is Big Boss actually the antagonist of the Metal Gear Solid series? Many players who completed it for the first time felt a sense of phantom pain and betrayal, resulting in a huge backlash by fans. But if you approach it again with an open mind, you will find that it perhaps is one of the best stealth games of all time.
Brothers in arms, even in death. Black Diamond dogs.
The Last Guardian. Telling a gut-wrenching tale of a boy who befriends this giant half-bird, half-mammal Trico, reviews of The Last Guardian were mixed precisely because of this creature. Trico behaved so lifelike that, whilst impressive from a technical standpoint, they were somewhat difficult to control. They weren't a tamed pet after all. It's only once trust develops between the pair that Trico begins to behave more obediently, and the knowledge of how to wrangle the best out of them carries over to successful playthroughs. Dark Souls 2. Dive into Dark Souls 2 straight after completing its predecessor, and you might feel disappointed. Movement is different, aesthetics are off, mechanics kind of puzzling, and to cap it off, the difficulty is brutal. However, these are just going to be your first impressions. Dark Souls 2 might initially seem like a downgrade from Dark Souls, and it's not as polished as Dark Souls 3, but the second in the trilogy is understandably many a player's favorite, mine included. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Sekiro's razor-sharp sword combat, demanding surgical precise timing to execute, is incredibly difficult to grasp. This makes it arguably From Software's most frustratingly impenetrable game, and it's not uncommon to complete an entire first run-through without fully clicking with the combat. But persevere in the pursuit of parrying perfection, and Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice is amongst the best From Software titles, and definitely rewarding on subsequent playthroughs. Final Fantasy XV. Those expecting an authentic RPG experience with Final Fantasy XV were left disappointed. A shakeup saw Final Fantasy XV morph into a different sort of RPG, with vast open worlds akin to every other open world game to boot. A sometimes confusing, sometimes repetitive gameplay mechanic rounds out the initially mediocre experience, but some players who have undertaken a second playthrough insist on its superiority over the first run. There's a lot of missable stuff, which when absorbed in tandem with prior knowledge of the campaign, makes for a much more fulfilling experience. Starfield. The boundaryless space exploration promised in Starfield wasn't quite as expected, given the loading screens that persist between worlds. It's hard to feel immersed in the thrill of spaceflight when you don't actually, fly through space. Starfield is still a rewarding story though, and New Game Plus provides new story permutations, new dialogue options, and new missions to undertake, so definitely worth taking Bethesda's universe for another spin if you were indifferent the first time around. Control. Control is one of those games that just gets better the further you go. More telekinetic powers are unleashed alongside even more powerful weaponry, until the 1-2 punch of powers and firepower become a majestic ballet of neon explosions and concrete shards. Getting to that point though takes time, and during the 25 to 30 hour campaign, you'd be forgiven for not collecting every scrap of lore dotted throughout the oldest house. Multiple playthroughs then serve as an opportunity to wrap your head around the mysteries of the FBC headquarters, to savor the brutalist architecture, to maybe understand what the hell is going on during the journey towards becoming the director. Cyberpunk 2077. It's kinda hard to hate Cyberpunk 2077 now, as its redemption arc is complete. The setting is as gritty and beautiful as ever, its streets are brimming with danger and intrigue, so if you haven't already, dive right back in and take in all of the splendor CD Projekt Red's bar-raising sci-fi opus has to offer. There's also Phantom Liberty, which is even better than the base game with espionage-based missions and intriguing choice and consequence gameplay mechanics.
Had to mute him for now. He hears you fine, just can't talk back.
You a construct? Like Johnny?
No, V. I'm a netrunner.
Yakuza Zero. The Yakuza series was a fairly unknown commodity outside of Japan, but when Yakuza Zero released, it brought the series under a new light. Initially, players were taken aback by its out-of-the-norm gameplay mechanics, weird side quests, and the slow pace of the first few chapters, but once they returned back, they found it to be a complete blast. Completing Yakuza Zero opens a world of possibilities. Premium Adventure serves as a type of free roam experience, with all progress, money, items, and abilities still intact. New Game Plus gives players chances to start a brand new story, with considerable progress maintained, plus the option of 3 difficulties. Hey, did you know that we at Gaming Bolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.